It's a great pleasure to welcome Jessie T to the show. She's a country musician from Ontario. How are you today, Jessie? Thank you for joining us.
Um, oh my goodness, thank you for having me. Yeah, I'm doing pretty good. Can't complain. The sun shines out.
Awesome. Yeah. So, how has your summer been?
The summer has been super busy, but also in like a way that I've not really experienced before. It's been a lot more band shows, and more like original music showcases, which is exactly what I've wanted to kind of the place I've wanted to be for a while. So it's been really, really great.
Mhm. So, would this be like what your typical summer is, or is this summer particularly busy or say?
A lot of my summers, like I've been a full-time musician for about 7, 8 years, minus the pandemic. And they've always been busy, but in more plain like bars and restaurants and stuff like that. I found this year in particular, I left more space for opportunities to kind of step towards my original music. And so it's been filled with more of those gigs, which has been really, really cool.
Hmm. Yeah. So, how do you balance time between recording and performance?
That's a great question. I it's funny with being really busy in the summer. I've kind of taken a step back from writing as much and recording. We're actually just finishing up my second studio album, which should be out this fall, which I'm really excited about. But I find that kind of the fall through the spring is more of my creative time. So
Mhm.
that's when I get into writing and recording and all that kind of stuff. And then summer is just more populated with performance.
Mhm. So, tell me about your upcoming album.
So this is an album that has been it's it's long overdue. I'm excited to have it finally out. But it's called Burning Back. There'll be 7 songs on it, 3 of which have already been released as singles. So I'm planning on another single to be released soon and have this album kind of accompany it.
Okay. So what are some of the singles that have been out?
So the singles, the first one we released off this project is Title Track. So it's a song about kind of the love of your life being the title track of your life. And I wrote that with 2 of my really good friends, Carrie DeMayer and John Cirillo. We released I Can Be Your Margarita, which is a super upbeat, kind of fun, tropical, quirky tune. Um, and there was a music video that was accompanied that. So that's on my YouTube channel. And then we have Just a Number, which is a really important song for me. Just kind of outlining the journey of being, from my perspective, a woman in the world, and especially the music industry, oftentimes being associated with numbers. So yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. So the final one, just a number, is one that I was got introduced to you by, and yeah, I think it's a wonderful song.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
So yeah, tell me more about the inspiration behind the song.
So, just a number, there's been, I've wanted to write about this idea for a while, but I find oftentimes there's sometimes songs that just spring out of you, and then other ones that do exist as ideas for a little while until you find a title that really feels like it encompasses that thought. And so I came up with this idea, just a number, and I had a writing session coming up with 2 phenomenal Canadian female artists, Nicole Ray and Elise Saunders. And I I had a feeling that that was the right room to bring this idea into. And it turned into a really important conversation, um, just about our own experiences. And then that became a song. So it focuses on, obviously how the numbers we get associated with are oftentimes our waist size, our age, how many followers we have, how many streams we have, and it just can become really overwhelming. Um, and so it's been really cool to be able to play this song out in public and have, the response from other people as well.
So what have been some of the responses that you've received?
Just a lot of people saying how important the song has been to them, especially women from a multitude of different age ranges. I think this is not just a musician's issue. I think this is a woman's issue, a person's issue, where so often, especially in the age of social media, we get comparative, like even in our own minds. There's numbers that define us, but then also we define our own value on these numbers as well. So this song, as much as it is an anthem to kind of stand up to that idea, it's also a reminder to myself to not find value in those numbers.
So, from your perspective, again, what are some of these numbers and why do they carry such significance?
Yeah. So I know with being a musician on stage, oftentimes, and on social media, having people define you by how skinny you are has always been one that's pretty significantly stuck with me. And there's a lot of movements towards body positivity that's happening currently, which is amazing. But it still feels like we're defined so much on how we look that that can become really toxic and really consuming. Another one is age. I know when I was turning 30, I half my 29th year I spent basically depressed because I was like, what does 30 mean? There's been so much um, pressure based upon this number, especially as a woman, that you're supposed to have your life together and be married and have a house and know exactly what you want to do with your life. Um, that I wasted half a year worrying about what a number meant rather than just recognizing it's just another day of the year. So those were a lot of kind of the concepts that we built into this song.
Mhm. Um, do you find that women are more affected by the numbers game than say men do, or it's just a difference in kind altogether?
I can only speak from my own perspective, so I would definitely say that I know myself and basically every single one of my friends, family members that I've had these conversations with, there's been a lot of women that have been affected by these quote unquote numbers. Um, but I've also had other genders kind of reach out to me and tell and kind of express the idea that this song means a lot to them as well. So I think as much as I wrote it from a woman's perspective, I think this is a people's issue, especially in the age of social media.
Mhm. Yeah. And that goes to whether social media is overall net good for musicians, and I'll leave that question to you.
Oh, I could go on for hours about this, but I feel like there's a lot of benefits to it, and then there's also a fair amount of negatives, to be honest. It's really cool that, even in our situation, people have access to a multitude of different kinds of music from different parts of the world. I think that is so special because as an independent artist, there's never been more control in our own hands to be able to influence our own careers. But I do feel like so often in the way the world works that if you have enough money for advertising and all that kind of stuff, that you can kind of cloud the system, I guess. And also, it's just really hard when you feel like you have to live like all the time online. You have to post what you're eating for lunch and what outfit you're wearing to here. It just sometimes takes away from being in the moment itself and not feeling like you have to capture it for other people's kind of validation. I know, but it's also cool to be able to like share different parts of your life that maybe people might not have seen otherwise. I feel like it's a catch 22.
Mhm. Yeah, and of course, social media usage shot up totally during the pandemic, right? And everyone's
Yeah.
online during that time. So,
Oh,
what
absolutely.
what was it like being a musician during COVID?
Uh, Weird. Weird would be the first word that came to mind. Um, Also challenging all of a sudden, but also um, there was a huge perspective gained. I had gone from playing, anywhere from 3 to 7 times a week in bars and restaurants, as we kind of discussed before. And when everything was halted and you were forced to kind of stop and we didn't have any opportunities to play, Um, I wasn't really sure where my career was going to go or if I was even going to be able to have a career again. It really made me kind of sit and be uh, honest about what I wanted to do with my time and with my music. And I felt like I had never really given my original music an opportunity um, to be showcased fully. So yeah, it was odd, but it was also cool being able to kind of sit and be intentional with the songs that I wanted to write, and network in a way that I hadn't been able to before.
Glad to hear it. Yeah. So your when I was when COVID happened, I was actually in Ontario, and
Oh, no way.
I was studying there at Trent that was in Peterborough. And
Yeah.
so where were you currently based?
Kitchener.
Oh, okay, that's fun.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've never been. So are you still there?
Yes. Yeah.
Hmm.
From Kingston originally, but I live in Kitchener now.
Hmm. How far apart are those? Uh,
About 4 hours, 4 hour
wow.
drive. Yeah,
Mhm.
not on a long weekend.
Mhm.
You can get up to 8 hours on a long weekend, which gets pretty intense.
Yeah, what's country music scene like there?
It's funny, the entire music scene in Kitchener is like quite underground. I feel like it's starting to kind of become more of a public thing, which is cool. Um, but I never like when I moved from Kingston to Kitchener, I didn't really know what scene I was moving to. I just knew that I met a phenomenal producer when I was 15. His name was Rick Hutt, and he had done some fairly significant stuff in the scene. So I was just kind of taking a shot on a dream, and little did I know that I was moving to a city with like wildly talented musicians in a bunch of different genres and a really healthy music scene, like one of which I can again play anywhere from 3 to 7 times a week. So
That's cool.
yeah.
Yeah, so tell me about your upbringing. How did music enter your life?
My dad bought a guitar when he was 14. Um, he took out his first bank loan in order to buy an Ovation, and I think music kind of started with him at that point. My mom always sang growing up in the kitchen,
Well,
so our house was just really fully immersed with music from a really young age. So I would say at that point the bug kind of got planted, but then I started taking piano lessons at 8, switched to vocal lessons at 13. My dad bought me a guitar at 15. Around that time I met my producer and I started writing and playing myself, and it's kind of blossomed into this career I have today.
yeah. So were your parents musicians?
Uh, Hobbyists.
Uh,
Yeah. So dad, like I said, dad was always playing guitar. Mom always sang, but neither of them were professional musicians by any means. My dad's uncle was a piano player. He was actually a blind pianist, which was kind of interesting to learn later in life. But I just come from a family that loves music, not one that necessarily has taken careers in it.
mhm. What kind of music did you listen to growing up?
A lot of 50s, 60s rock and roll. So like Everly Brothers, Connie Francis, Leslie Gore, Neil Sedaka, and then some of the country, Don Williams, Dolly Parton, Willie Nelson. And then as I kind of grew up, one of my really good friends moved in 2 houses down, and her dad was in a country band. So at that point, I was introduced to kind of the 90s, 2000s country music, which was a lot of like the Dixie Chicks. And obviously, Shania Twain was like obviously a huge influence of mine. But it was at that point that like really the seed was planted for falling in love with a story that country music allowed its artists to tell.
Mhm. Yeah. Shania Twain is from Ontario too, right?
Yeah, Timmins.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, way up there.
Mhm. So you mentioned the storytelling aspects of country music. So yeah, why don't you elaborate on that?
Yeah. I very vividly remember it was one of the first times I'd been at the studio, and my producer at the time, Rick, had asked me what kind of music I wanted to make. And I had said I would like to make everything because, again, my musical the music that I like to listen to is fairly diverse. And he had said you have to kind of choose one. Like, what aisle are you going to be in Walmart when your music, gets put in there? And at that point, I really started kind of thinking and sitting down, and it was the story aspect of country music that I really fell in love with. The songwriting that you could really express those inner thoughts that you might not be able to have a conversation about, or it feels weird to have a conversation about. So writing has always been a therapeutic thing of sorts for me.
Mhm. Who are some of the best storytellers in music, country or otherwise?
That's a great question. Um, hmm, that is a great question. I can tell you like some of my favorite songs. I don't know. I think Taylor Swift has always been like a huge inspiration of mine. Just the way that all of her songs are I always say generally specific,
Hmm,
which is really cool. Like they're general enough that they appeal to the masses, but specific enough that they feel like they're speaking directly to you. Um, Carolyn Dawn Johnson, who is a Canadian artist, has always been an absolute favorite of mine. Die of a Broken Heart was the first song that I had heard performed live and was like, I want to do that. So at CCMAs, which is the Canadian Country Music Awards Association, they do like a week seminars and showcases and stuff. And I have had the opportunity to meet her a few times, which has been really, really cool. Um, there's just so many phenomenal writers and artists. Dolly Parton, obviously, being another one. So, yeah.
mhm. Yeah. I think Taylor Swift is coming to Ontario at some point, right?
Yes,
Hmm.
absolutely. Yeah, that was a fandom moment for sure.
Wow.
Yeah. I've been to see two of her concerts, the Speak Now and the Red Tour, and they were some of the coolest shows that I've seen. I've definitely been to a fair amount of concerts, but the just the stage production and the amount of detail that went into that show was definitely very inspiring.
I see. Yeah, tell me more about what's it like attending a Taylor Swift concert.
Uh, it was just a full experience, I would say. Like from the kind of the minute you walk in the stadium, you see people that are just like fully immersed in the experience that is Taylor Swift. She's become more than just a person. It's like um, I don't even know. It's like a full thing. But the show itself, I always compare it to kind of like seeing a musical. There's like people that pop up out of the bottom of the stages, and there's set changes and light shows and choreography. It's pretty spectacular if you've never seen it.
Hmm. Yeah. Unfortunately, I've never had the understood the appeal of Taylor Swift. It's maybe it's a gender thing, but I
Yeah.
mean, I just don't find her song to be, that impactful. So, but I'd like to hear from you. Like, how does she impact you?
Yeah, I think like I find a lot more connection to her older music than I do the newer music. I feel like the newer music is like kind of like an inside uh, there's like an inside story or inside scoop that I'm a little bit outside of. But when she first jumped onto the country scene, I can tell you that like the entire thing was rattled and shook, and she just influenced a huge step forward for female artists specifically. Just in the way that the songs were really conversational. Um, it wasn't necessarily the singing that set her apart, but it was just the idea that yeah, I don't know, that you could write about love songs and just be who you are. I don't know. I fell in love with her at the country music era.
Mhm. So, yeah, I understand that, songs about love are very prevalent, and probably half of the songs in pop music are songs about love, maybe more. And it can be difficult to find a unique love song. So I wonder, what's your approach to writing one?
It's that's another great question. Actually, it was Jason Isbell, who's another
Mhm.
songwriter that I highly, highly respect. Um, but to he was talking about finding the thing in the room that, listening to the nuance in conversations that people wouldn't necessarily listen for, which kind of brings out those different things rather than being in love. It's like, what does it feel like to be in love? What is the sensation of being in love like? Like, what does that smell like to you? Like, bringing out just different characteristics that maybe people haven't heard of before. um, but I think there is a beauty in it being a universal experience. Like, we've all been in love with something. It doesn't necessarily need to be a person. It could be an animal. It could be a town you've lived in. Um, I think just being able to brainstorm on what love means to you and kind of go further and further down that rabbit hole until you find something that feels unique.
So why don't you point the audience to an example of a love song that you've written?
Yeah, I think, well, ones that have been released, title track is, I think, kind of an interesting uh, perspective on that. I had never really heard the idea um, that a partner could be described as a title track to your life, like kind of associating that music thing back to it. Um, Off the first album, Reckless Heart, that was released in 2016, one of my all-time favorite songs is Dancing in the Rain, which came from a really kind of specific date that I had been on. And the song just kind of was inspired by that. So yeah, I think finding the honesty in the moments that stand out to you is a good place to start.
How does falling in love feel differently from, say, falling out of love?
Uh, they're both intense. They're both very intense. Um, I think the difference is, it's funny that you asked me that, and it's like there's a lot of similarities. Um, being scared about falling in love and trusting the person, or falling out of love and being scared to be alone. I think it's usually just being happy or not happy. But there's a sense of a relief to both as well, which is fascinating. Um, but I think the feeling of being together versus being on your own would be the biggest difference, at least in my mind.
So going back to the song "Just a Number," it's a pretty personal song, and I wonder if, as an artist, to what extent should you reveal, the personal aspects of your life to ostensibly a bunch of strangers?
Yeah, it there is a there is a specific line to walk, at least in my perspective, but I find the more honest that I can be in my writing, um, the more people are able to relate to it. Because I think being able to like expose those vulnerable parts of yourself are really where people find the honesty and the truth, and that, like, oh my gosh, I've been there too. How did they know that I felt that way? Um, and I think my cop out is the more honest I can be in writing, the less honest maybe I have to be in interviews, the less I have to talk about it. But no, I think just a number came from a really personal place, and there was a lot of uncomfortable things to say in there. But being able to stand behind the art I create and the messages that I deliver as an artist, I think that's a really important thing that I've just started recognizing in my own artistic journey.
Mhm. Yeah. I wonder if the issues that you've addressed in "Just a Number," how does it affect fellow country music artists who are women? Uh,
Yeah, it's I just know from playing it live before it was released, um, and now that it has been released, there was a strong impact that happened in the room, and the amount of people that came up to me and were like, "When is that song being released?" Like, it seemed to hit in a different way than any music that I've released before. But I think it was from honestly that vulnerable place that a lot of people are scared to go, because so often in this in being a public image, you want to be perceived as perfect. You want to be perceived as something that everybody can consume, and everybody likes, and the idea of being pretty and all that kind of stuff. And being vulnerable is often a little bit messier than perfect. And so it was a challenge for me to be able to go there, and it's definitely emotionally paid off for me.
Yeah. Tell me more about the first time that you played that song live.
I was nervous. I was nervous. I was at the Moonshine Cafe in Oakville for a writer's round, and I played it, and um, I think Nicole Ray was there, which was one of the writers that I had written it with, and yeah, it just was received very well. And I had people that came up to me after, and again, just told me how important of a song that was, and how big of a fan they were, and they wanted to hear it again. So when was it going to be out?
Mhm,
And it took a little bit, but I'm happy it's out in the world now.
mhm. So in reference to the show's title, I probably should be a bit philosophical for a bit. The sentiment that's being repeated in that song is I'm more than just a number. Um, so so that means that you have an intrinsic way of looking at yourself, or judging your own self-worth that you know that you would like the other person's perception of you to correspond with that, right? And
Yeah,
of course, is I think it goes with both men and women that we don't want to be valued merely by our looks, but nevertheless, we would do our best, to make ourselves look, as presentable as ever,
yeah,
as possible. Sorry. And another dimension that people do not like to be focused on, say, is wealth, but we prefer not to be judged by how much money we have, but at the same time, we don't want to either be poor or just to look poor. So to
yeah.
what extent let's focus on looks for a second. To what extent should looks matter you know, in the public, I suppose?
Yeah. Well, first off, thank you for kind of taking a dive into that. It's I always find it's really rewarding when people see kind of that internal message that we had hoped to be portrayed. Um, I think, of course, everybody wants to look their version of looking good, but I
Mhm,
think when it goes past our own perspective of what looks good, there's some people that love to wear makeup. There's other people that don't like to wear makeup, and both of those should be completely fine. Um, some people like being a little bit curvier, and other people like, working out a little bit more. I think both of those are fine. It's when it goes past your own internal perspective of what looks good and starts being mirrored by society's expectations. I think that's that's where that line gets drawn for me.
mhm,
Some people are more conservative, some people like to flaunt a little bit more. I think both of those are completely fine. Um, yeah, I think it's whatever you want to do, you should be able to do.
mhm. Um, I think in the West, societal expectations on beauty standards are more implicit, as in they're not explicitly enforced, but they're still there. So,
Yes.
from your perspective, what are some of the ways in which these standards are enforced?
Um, I mean, I went to a Catholic high school, and we had uniforms. So there was very like specific specifications on what were ways for men and women to dress. Even back then, your kilt had to be a certain length. You had to be conservative, but there was always kind of a bit of a thing, even down to like what is popular to wear. Um, be it a new jacket, or there's I might be dating myself, but like UGG boots or a specific kind of jeans. I feel like there's different trends that kind of set the expectation on so many of these numbers, whether you're, fit enough to fit in the jeans, whether you have enough money to be able to afford these specific items. There's, for whatever reason, when I started looking at all of these expectations of me, um, that I felt value, like determined my own value, there was always a number behind them. So yeah, I don't know if that answers the question.
I suppose, yeah. Well, I think there should be sufficient complaint about, to what extent are beauty standards be enforced and whether uh, they are enforced justly or not. But nevertheless, there's still such a thing as beauty. And I think as humans, we prefer beauty to ugliness. So I wonder, what does beauty mean to you?
It's funny if this has changed throughout the years. Because in my teens, it was very much fitting a specific body image and having my hair a certain way. Um, and then in my 20s, it started to be a little bit more internal. I just turned 31 in January, and again, that 30-year mark really rocked me. But it also kind of let me shed some of the societal expectations that I had so often focused on in my life. So I think beauty to me is kind of what I had focused on before, is whatever feels right. If I wake up in the morning and I want to put on a full face of makeup and do my hair and dress all glamorous and go out, I can be beautiful in that way. But then if I want to wear pajama pants and not wear any makeup and throw my hair up in a bun, that's also beautiful. I think there's beauty in the wisdom that I've gained over my life, um, through my own experiences. I think there's a lot of beauty in the people that I love, like my friends and my family that I hold dear, and how we treat each other. I think there's beauty everywhere, as long as you kind of focus on it.
Um, it reminds me of how I never really like Korean pop music or K-pop. Um, you know how in K-pop you have these groups of, well, there are boy groups and there are girl groups too, right? And you see in those specifically in the girl groups where they all look the same, and
Yeah,
and it's because South Korea has like a thriving, perhaps pernicious beauty industry, specifically
yeah,
when it comes to cosmetic surgery. And you see like groups of 9 women, and they all have the same looking eyelashes and V-shaped chins and even nose and smiles and such. And I mean, I don't find that to be beautiful either. But there are certain things about like both men and women which they perceive to be like a personal flaw or a personal limitations, but I find to be beautiful too because it reflects
yeah,
their individuality and authenticity.
yeah,
So I wonder if you resonate with that particular perspective.
definitely. It's funny, like where this idea of what is beautiful comes from. Like what in, from your perspective, it's like, who decided that the little V chins and the hair all being a certain length and the eyelashes being so, who decided that that was beautiful? This, like, obviously probably some sort of uh, company or something, but um, it's just interesting, even down to like plastic surgery nowadays. It's not that I'm completely against it. I think, again, whatever makes you feel fulfilled is your own definition of beauty. But this sameness and lack of individuality is, I think it is really perpetuated by social media and kind of physical expectation. But taking back that to it.
Mhm. Right. Um, so one of my favorite philosopher is Martin Heidegger, and he and other people in the school of existentialism he he was positing that authenticity means that you do something uh, because it is in your will or in your desire to do it, rather than doing it either because everyone else is doing it or um, because you're doing it to gain, say, external approval or validation. Which is why I yeah, like you, I share the view that there's nothing inherently wrong with cosmetic surgery. Nevertheless, too many people are doing it because they either everyone else is doing it or they are craving the approval of others, which is
Hmm.
why there is that pernicious effect of social media in that everyone is copying everyone else and you can see the results.
Yeah.
Um, and it can be a way it can help manifest this sense of inauthenticity and pretty soon. And one thing that beauty defines itself by is by authenticity. It,
Yeah.
it cannot be manufactured or it cannot be homogeneous.
Yeah. I completely agree. Well, there's nothing inherently wrong with the idea of plastic surgery. I think when it comes from, as again, an external expectation, that's where the difference changes for me. And I feel like there's a lot of companies that are reliant on the idea that everybody's lips should look the same or everybody should have the same cheekbones and stuff like that. And maybe that might not be the best thing to say, but I feel like that's a lot of where this idea of the song came from, is again reminding myself that there is beauty in that individuality.
Mhm. It's true that man is a social animal,
Yeah.
and I think the socialization is kind of a need, but nevertheless, I think we've gone in like two different directions at the same time because of social media. One, we are hyper socialized, but only on the internet. We're on the internet
Yes.
way too much. We receive parodies of human connection via Facebook and Instagram and etc. But at the same time, we lack real social interactions, the one that enables connections with other people. And
Yeah.
perhaps that's why behaviors that are specifically designed to arouse people's attentions and maybe momentary approval is on the increase.
Yeah. It is so true. Like how we are so saturated with interaction and that kind of like click validation.
Mhm,
But, um, there's a lot of people that don't know how to have a conversation in person nowadays. I grew up with older parents that we were very based on social interaction and stuff like that. But it is, yeah, those are very fascinating points.
mhm. And there's beauty in character too, not just in the things that makes you unique. Is well, I would say this word that is I really shouldn't like. I think really should be brought back to life being virtue, as in the things that makes you a good human being. So the concept was proposed by Aristotle, but I think has been lost in modernity. But nevertheless, what I'm getting at is that someone who is behaves him and herself according to the highest ethical standards, and also those who who are who get on well with other people, not just because he or she is taking advantage of them, but because it is in his or her initiative to do so.
Mhm.
That way, it can be quite beautiful, and it's not the kind of beauty that is easily perceived, right? Because it's very intangible and invisible.
It's true. yeah, the way that you treat other people is like a real testament to your character. Um, yeah, I completely agree with that. It's like there's so many different nuances of beauty that aren't based upon a physical attribute. Um, that I think it the world would be a much more beautiful place if we started focusing on those things,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
not like this kind of facade that social media creates. It's like, the videos of someone giving a person without a home a sandwich, and it's like, could we not have just done that and not taken a video of it? Like, I don't know, those things. It's to your point. It's like that is a beautiful characteristic, but there's like an external validation that is sought by doing an act like that.
So another number that you mentioned has become like tyrannical in people's lives is age, and I believe it is very true that Western culture, and it has spread to other cultures too. It's very anti-aging, and I think
Yes.
women are way more affected by it than men, and I think that's rather wrong from someone who comes from a non-Western background. I was born in Vietnam, by the way. Um,
Okay.
Certainly, it has the certain anti-aging mentalities make its way into our country because of imports from outside. But traditionally, we've always looked towards the elders as a source of wisdom. Um, and in some ways, the elderly can possess a kind of beauty that the younger people do not have. And and I certainly think that in the Western sphere, youth has become too much of a commodity, a valued commodity, and it's not something that someone can hold forever, and people keep purchasing products intended to hopefully, I guess, prolong youth, so to speak. The worst example of this, I think, is Madonna. I think she's like what's in her 60s now, and she just
Yeah.
looks more and more like a China doll than she was in the 80s. Um, and and I think that's kind of wrong in some ways, right? There needs to be a reversal of this trend.
Yeah, it's so odd what this fixation on looking like you're in your 20s or in your teens. Like there's such a beauty in the opportunity to grow old. Um, I have a fair amount of illnesses that go throughout my family, and my mom in particular had always said, I woke up in the morning, and that's a blessing in itself. It's better than the alternative, and it's this idea that aging, especially being a woman, is voodoo, that we need to look like we're in our teens, but we still are supposed to continue to accumulate the wisdom and the societal like check marks that we're supposed to. I don't know, it just seems so counterintuitive. Um, yeah, it's such an odd it's such an odd thing. There's so much beauty in aging, and I wish that we could get back to that. And I try every day to remind myself that, the wrinkles that I start to see on my face and the gray hairs, it's like those are all a beautiful thing that I've earned, um, by the life that I've lived. So, yeah.
Perhaps the greatest work of English literature that deals with youth and aging is Oscar Wilde's Portrait of Dorian Gray. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
Oh,
It's the basic plot line is that the character of Dorian Gray has his portrait painted, and he's a young man. He's like in his early 20s, and another character, Lord Henry, came by and he says, "Well, wouldn't it be nice if you would stay, as young as that portrait forever, right?" And incidentally, it became true. And Dorian Gray obviously lives many years, but he still looks like the person in the portrait. And he engaged in like a host of apparently immoral, debauch acts of sex and other like bad habits, and he engaged in a whole host of very immoral and unethical activities too, including like cheating and murdering and all that. And I remember at the end of the novel, he takes a look at that portrait again, and he and the portrait, as he does these immoral deeds, deteriorates through time. And he looks at the ostensibly his real self, which is the metaphor here, and he takes a knife and he violently stabs it. And the novel ends with the man Dorian Gray looking like the character, the hideous looking person in the portrait, whereas the portrait looks like him while the portrait's being painted, which is a wonderful
Wow.
image there.
Yeah, that's huge. Wow. Yeah, that is such a fascinating. I'll have to read that novel. I'm very intrigued by that.
It's
It's
yeah,
yeah,
it's a very wonderful book, and it's very short too, and it's full of Wild's his trademark witticism.
fascinating.
Mhm,
But it's true. Like we are so much of our experiences, right? Scars and all. Um, so there is it's speaking. It's a love song, but Jason Isbell
mhm,
wrote one called "If We Were Vampires," and it speaks about the idea that um, love is beautiful because there's a time limit on it, and just another number associated. But it just made me think about that when you were talking about how he doesn't age through the portrait, and it's there's beauty in knowing that there's not an endless amount of time, and that our experiences go to contribute to the things we experience in life.
mhm. Yeah, there's I don't know if you're familiar with Interview with a Vampire by Anne Rice, the series of books.
No, I'm not.
There was a movie based on it with Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt, and it
Okay.
specifically deals with this theme that because you're a vampire, you don't age, so you look like Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt basically forever, and that does not really bring you happiness at all. In fact, if you see the movie, Brad Pitt is kind of a miserable character, and so is Tom Cruise because they live by murdering off humans, right?
Right. Yeah, it's funny, like with any portrayal of a vampire, they get to hold on to this like youthful. I love also how this song has inspired a conversation about vampires. I'm a big fan of that. But it's funny because they are able to hold on to this thing that like in today's society is deemed so valuable, is like looking youthful. But there's not a single vampire in any show that I know that's been happy about the idea that they, are frozen in time. Um, in turn, yeah, they're always wishing for life to be back to the way that it was. Um, so I do think that there is a beauty again back in age and our experiences that we get to rightfully experience in life.
And you mentioned your education in a Catholic high school, and I should point out that Anne Rice is also raised Catholic, and she spent many years as a believing Catholic. But I hear that recently she has stopped calling herself that way. Um, so her vampire novels, I think, has a deep Catholic ethic in it.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's fascinating. The older that I've grown, I do appreciate the community aspect of faith. Um, but I tend to lean more spiritual now than I do kind of basing myself in any specific religious category.
Mhm. Yeah. So I'd like to hear about what do you believe in?
I that's interesting. I have a lot of ideas. I think this world is too much of a coincidence for there not to be some sort of uh, power, higher power. It's like the idea that, we expel carbon dioxide and the trees make oxygen. Like that's just such a beautiful relationship. Um, that seems a little too perfect to just be coincidental. I don't know what that is though. Um, and I also do think that there's got to be some sort of, I don't know if it's reincarnation or afterlife, but there's a, I don't know, the idea that we just cease to exist after we die is, that just seems a little too simple. I'm not I think the older that I get, the more I'm okay with not knowing what and how these things work. But just leaving it up to the idea that there's a lot of beauty in the world that maybe we're just not supposed to understand.
Mhm. I think as a religious person, I'm a Catholic myself. I find that it's better to think of the particular faith that I'm in as one. It tells a story, and the story has a very bad denouement, or was it? But there's a great catharsis, um, and it has a it has a bad penultimate moment, but a good ending.
Yeah,
And also, it from that story, there derives a way of living that I think every human can live by,
I
and
agree.
it is rather that than a doctrine or a set of rules that you have to adhere to. I think that it's easier if I think of it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the guidelines of be it, religion or just wanting to be a good person. It's funny. There's a lot of similarities between the two. Um, it just comes down to the way that you treat other people and like the things not to do. But yeah, I, I don't know. I think I'm always just curious. I love
Mhm.
hearing different perspectives and different beliefs, and to think that mine will never change or evolve. I think there's a beauty in just kind of seeing where my life leads me.
Mhm. Another aspect about age that you've touched on is the supposed milestones that you have to reach by the time you reach the age of something, and like you, I've always found myself like falling behind on that respect. For example,
Yeah,
I know that at the same age as I am, many people have either are in a romantic relationship or are married. I know some people who are even younger than me are getting married, and I, as of this recording, am still a bachelor. That's one of the things that I find to be missed out by, and there are other things too in that I can never catch up with I guess the age that I'm currently in. Like there's still parts of me that feels like I'm 16 for some reason. So
yeah.
I wonder if that is something that you share.
Oh, absolutely. 100%. And it's fascinating having these conversations because there is not a single person that I know that doesn't feel like they're behind on these milestones that we're supposedly supposed to achieve by a certain age. But I know 30 was a really big milestone for me because I always thought growing up that I was going to be married at 25 and starting to have kids at 27. Now I chose a very different lifestyle, to be completely honest, being a musician, um, but recognizing how much life that I lived and kind of the beauty of the way that my life turned out. It's like those milestones no longer um, were suited for me. So that that was kind of where that idea came from. But absolutely, like there's the societal construct of having your life figured out by 30 when realistically, I think I can only speak from my own perspective. My life began at 30. Um, I don't know. I think there's sometimes we just take different lengths of time to figure stuff out, but I think there's a beauty in um, figuring out what else you're doing during that time. I'm sure you might not be in a romantic relationship, but there's probably been a lot of personal development that you've been working on in the time that maybe like the two things can exist, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
I see. Yeah, and I
Yeah.
can definitely relate to that. Um, so have you have you had a change of views regarding I guess aging and growing older as you age and grow older?
Yes. Definitely. Um, yeah, I remember being, you know, in my mid to late 20s and starting to see the wrinkles on my forehead and freaking out, thinking that those defined me. Um, and so I would wear hats to like cover the signs of age and, get darker foundation or like heavier foundation and thinking that, I could never be caught with these signs of aging. Um, but again, the older that I've got, the more life that I've lived, and really fortunately, the beautiful relationships that I have with women specifically that are older than me, and men and a bunch of different people, um, being able to learn from their perspectives about how their life has really gotten better with age. Um, I think there's a hope that I found in having those conversations, and also just doing what I do for a living. I get to meet brand new people all the time and learn from their perspectives. And um, yeah, I I do think that I'm starting to, as much as I do get caught in obviously the everyday, oh no, there's another gray hair here or whatever. Um, yeah, I definitely am growing more and more to believe that age is beauty.
Yeah. And as an aside, one of the previous guests that I got on this show and who actually introduced me to the Ontario country music scene is Paige Rutledge.
Oh,
So
Paige
you
is
guys have
awesome.
crossed paths. Yeah, yeah, she's
Yeah,
wonderful.
she
We had a wonderful talk.
she is great. She's just such a bubble of energy and happiness, and yeah, really great musician as well.
Mhm. So
Yeah.
tell me about some of the upcoming shows that you have.
So this upcoming Thursday, I'm playing at Harrow Fair. So me and my band are headlining the Thursday night there. Um, and then we have the CCMAs, which is the Canadian Country Music Association. They do like a week of seminars and showcases and stuff. So I'm performing at that and an all women's round on the Thursday, I believe. I'm playing in Kitchener Waterloo. I'm one of the direct support for headliners for Bestival, which is on September 16th. So there's a bunch of really kind of cool dates as well as just some more local um, stuff in Kitchener Waterloo throughout Southern Ontario. So I'm just about to update my website, so all my dates will be on there. So jessiet.ca.
Awesome. Yeah, and I look forward to your upcoming album too. Do you know the release date yet?
I don't have a specific date yet, but we're just about to nail that down, so I will definitely let you know.
Awesome. Yeah, and
Yeah.
a concluding question. What does music mean to you?
Ooh. Uh, it's funny that that relationship has also evolved over time. Um, Music is my entire life, and that seems kind of like a cliche statement, but it really is. Um, it's my therapy, it's my outlet, it's my job, it's my passion. It's an avenue that I've met most of my really good friends. Um, there's people that do music as kind of a pastime or as a hobby, but I 100% am a lifer. There's nothing else that I would do with my life. So it definitely means the world to me. I'm so thankful for people that have kind of supported my journey and continue to hop on. Yeah.
That's wonderful. I do find that talking to people who like music is a surefire way to connect with them. I think nothing brings people together better than music.
I completely agree. It's like a universal language.
I
The
know.
amount of times, actually, I was just in Spain and France last week.
Oh, cool.
I'm a background vocalist for Jason Blaine. And so we were playing a festival over in Salardu, so in northern Spain. And there was a bunch of folks that didn't speak English, but it was like they there was obviously some folks that also did, but just being able to communicate through a series of notes and harmonies, it's like you can feel something from that even if you don't understand the specific sentiment. And I know that's one of my practices too, is listening to different types of music from different parts of the world, um, just for inspiration. And even though it might not be a language that I specifically understand, there's still an emotion that I capture from those things. I think it's just such a beautiful thing that that is something that brings us together.
Mhm. All right. Thank you very much, Jessie T, for joining this show.
Thank Oh, thank you so much for having me. This has been a great conversation.